With now that initial completion of the installation for direct access at the server side done, we've got a couple things we have to do over on our clients. Not the least of which is to get them the necessary group policy objects deployed out so that they can configure themselves to interact with the server we just created. So this is our server over here on Remote One. Before I go over to the client on the other side, I want to show you back over here under the domain controller here. If we take a look on this server dc.company.pri, I just want to show you the two group policy objects that were created. Now, a second ago, I told you be very careful about which security group you associate for access for these direct access clients. And that's in part because, as you can see here, both the direct access client and server settings GPOs get attached here to the level of the domain. They are further constrained down by this use of security filtering, which is exactly equal to that direct access computers group that we created just a minute ago. Now again, you don't want to go through modifying any of this. This is the process by which you go about configuring the clients. It's managed entirely by the remote access console, so you don't want to go adjusting any of the settings here for these GPOs. But I do want to show you that in order to get the clients configured, if I flip back here to our client, we have a couple of different tasks that we have to accomplish. Not the least of which is to get this client actually back into the appropriate domain, simulating that the user's laptop is coming back into the network so that it can receive this group policy object that we just created. Let me come back here to VMware Workstation and then reconfigure the network adapter from that custom VMnet 5 configuration to our bridged network. So we are again here just reconfiguring this machine so that it exists here in our Active Directory domain on the 192.168.0 net as opposed to out in the rest of the world. With that, I can open up an elevated command prompt here and have it then just redo its configuration for its IP address settings. So ipconfig renew. With that now done, let me go ahead and reconfigure the network adapter here so that it has the appropriate IP address information for the internal network. Now, in a production world, obviously, you wouldn't have to go through all this trouble. You would be using DHCP on these clients. But because we're simulating things here in VMware Workstation, and we may not necessarily have an easy-to-access DHCP server out in the, quote, outside world, the fake outside world, I'm actually just using a static address here. It just makes things a little bit simpler. So let me adjust this back to 192.168.0.50. with the default gateway of 192.168.0.1 and the appropriate address too that corresponds to dc.company.pri, our DNS server. If I hit OK here and close, that should get us now on the appropriate network. What that should allow me to do is reboot the machine just to get it properly on this network and the inside. So let me pause things and then accelerate us to the other end of the reboot. Now, let me go log back here into this machine, and what I want to show you is that if we have successfully received that group policy, we should see over here in the charms bar that workplace connection that we configured as part of that way in which our clients can connect to direct access. So I'm going to hit the Windows C button here and then click on Settings and then the Connection so that we can see, yep, indeed, we do have workplace connection that is configured here. Now remember, the point is that we're not using workplace connection whenever we're inside the LAN. So you're seeing a little, not really an error message here, but a notification that says, hey, we're already connected to the network locally or using some VPN. What this means is that this machine has successfully contacted that network location server. And so because it can, it recognizes that it's on the local area network and doesn't need to use direct access. All the direct access bits of the stack have been disabled. And in fact, there are a pair of PowerShell commands that I want to share with you also that can come in handy in determining what your connection status is when you're dealing with this direct access. Let me bring up here an elevated PowerShell prompt that we can use to actually execute these pair of commands. So there's a couple of them I want to show you. The first of which is get DA connection status. So get DA connection status here will just give us a nice view as to whether or not we're making use of direct access or not. So right now we're connected locally. That lets us know that we're not using the direct access connection. The other one is get DNS client NRPT policy, which gets us the contents of that name resolution policy table that we haven't really done much with yet there in group policy. So this is that name resolution policy table. Again, I'll talk about that here in just a second, but that is the mechanism that allows you to control when a user attempts to contact a resource, which DNS server it attempts to resolve that name against. This becomes important, as I mentioned earlier, whenever I've got resources that could exist internally or could exist externally as well. So both of these come in handy again for helping us identify if this client is indeed using direct access or not. Let us now reconfigure the network to simulate this client leaving the local area network and then going out to an airport or a coffee shop, or the user went home for the day and now needs to connect back in using direct access. This configuration I'm going to show you will seem just a little convoluted, but I kind of have to sort of fit that square peg into this round hole because of what we're doing here within VMware Workstation. So bear with me for a couple of these configs, but I'll explain why I'm doing them here in just a second. The very first thing we want to do is actually to go back here into our virtual network editor. I'm once again breaking the fourth wall here with VMware Workstation to reconfigure that host-only network here to be not host-only, but instead to be a NAT-based network. And I'm doing this because there's another hard-coded limitation in direct access, that the direct access client has to believe that it's on the internet for this to work. And so our host-only network does not have access to the rest of the internet. The client realizes that and then just simply won't light up the direct access components of the stack. So let's set this here to a NAT network, and I want to show you that then what that does is it enables me to create a gateway out to the rest of the internet so the client won't perceive that it's on a private network. Once we reconfigure that over here to NAT, the next thing we have to do here with the client is reconfigure the settings for the client to get it off of that original bridged network that we were on and instead into this little private network that we created before. Doing so kind of has the net same result in that I've got a client that can attach to the network, but because I have this VMnet 5 here, which is where my direct access server is listening for direct access clients, this gives me the ability to then connect up into that internal simulated internet network that we created before. I'll choose OK here to go about reconfiguring that, and then I need to come back over here and then reconfigure the network also on the client itself. So that was done on the virtual machine object, and this is happening now here on the individual client object. For this client object, I am going to connect it up via IP version 4 here to its new address, 193.169.1.50. So same address we were using before, with a default gateway of 193.169-1.2. Now for its DNS server address, though, I need to simulate that this client is connecting up to the DNS address at your house, or the DNS address that you get connected to whenever you plug in through the hotel or airport. I have a DNS server here that corresponds to 192.168.0.99 here that has an A record for our remote1.company.pri server baked into it. So that server will be able to resolve Remote 1 and allow us to connect in through direct access. Again, a lot of the networking here may seem a little convoluted, but this is the kind of extra networking thinking you'll have to go through anytime you're dealing with that inside-outside world that is remote access. With this all now configured, let's go through and reboot the machine so that we can take a look whether or not the configuration that we've applied to this machine when it was on the network will now be able to access direct access now that it is off. I will go through here and reboot the machine once again, and then accelerate things to the other end of the reboot so we can go ahead and log in, which we will do right here. So let me log into this machine now. I'll be logging in with my company credentials, even though I'm not technically in company.pri anymore. And if I do Windows button C here to open up the terms bar again, click on Settings, and then the network I'm connected to, and then hey, what do you know? Our workplace connection here is currently set to connected. So what this means now is that we can actually access those internal resources from this client that happens to be sitting in that hotel or airport or from a home office. Let's actually test to see whether or not we can access those resources or not. Let me come here and try to do a couple of different verifications. Let me just ping my domain controller, so dc.company.pri. Yep, I do have a response. Notice how the response here is an IPv6 response. I can even ping short names, so ping DC. I could also connect up to other resources as well. I've got a server called file1 that has a couple file shares on it. So if I did / file1 / whatever, I could access those file shares, like my company shared file share there. All of these resources are inside the LAN. They're on the other side of that direct access server. But as you can see, I can connect to them using my usual UNC paths. I can connect to them just running the regular ping commands and NS lookup commands right here on the client. And the most important part here is that there's really nothing that the client really had to do in order to get here. I know that we went through a couple of network reconfigurations, but in the usual world, that user just simply disconnects from their network, gets in the car, drives home, and plugs back into whatever their local network is, where one assumes DHCP is operating, and they will automatically be connected here to these internal resources without any additional effort. That is, as I'd mentioned before, kind of the pure awesomeness of direct access.